Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. Although we had the public comment at the scheduled on the agenda at the end, I'm going to ask, do we have any public comment?
We do not have.
Okay, perfect. Then we're going to start with the very first item on our agenda is policy 6.50, field trips, foreign travel. Oh, thank you. We're going to start with introductions. I'm going to we'll just do the dais. Mary, do you want to start?
I'm Mary Kane, Senior Legal Counsel.
Liz Large, Contracted General Counsel.
Abby Sullivan, Board Member.
Eddie Wong, Board Member.
Julia Brim-Edwards, Board Member and Committee Chair. And I believe Frankie is going to be, our student rep is going to be joining us, but joining us late, is she? She let me know she's going to be joining us late. And Kara? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Karen Bradshaw, Executive Assistant.
Great, thank you. Okay. So our first policy, we had a discussion about it at the last meeting, and for this meeting, Director Wong has proposed some additional language, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and walk through it, if you don't mind. And where you think sort of some of the decision points or discussion points should be.
Okay. Yeah, does everyone have, I assume everyone's seen the red line version? For some reason my iPad is acting.
That's because I touched it.
Doesn't recognize your finger pattern. Yeah, so the issue, as introduced last time, came about because of the Taiwanese, Vietnamese, and Japanese trips, capstone projects for 8th grade middle school. Every year since this policy was originally revised, 2018, 19, 17, something like that.
19, I think.
19, had to ask for extended time. From the sound of it, it sounded like through both admin side and teacher side, there was a lot of things about it that resulted in some unsustainable practices. And so this is an attempt to kind of revise that policy to kind of also to, in one aspect, also address the administrative directive, which is, limits some trips to 5 school days missed, but a maximum of 20 school days for extenuating circumstances or exceptional circumstances, which these field trips that we're talking about didn't qualify for in terms of the way that was interpreted. So I don't know, should I read these out loud or just highlight?
Everybody has a copy of them. Why don't once you
Just
go
highlight.
through each section, it's not that long, and
Yeah, great. So it's meant to be, I think all the numbers got reset on the copy and paste, but it was under number 2, which is talks about district staff. Also, the part of number 2 is to reduce or to make sure that the students who are not going on the trip, that their education is not disrupted. The additions to this is supposed to read A instead of 0, is saying that additional flexibility and requirements such as extended time may be granted if these distance travels requires extra time, such as overseas travel, and also if it is involving a rigorous academic experience, like attending a school in a foreign country. And it also lays out a list of things that must be met. So like reasonable accommodations have to be made to minimize the impact to students remaining on campus. We also, this is something that Director Brim-Edwards brought up, we also want to minimize impact to other staff as well. So if it's a reoccurring or annual trip, the staffing for the trip, in terms of non-program staff partaking in it, is something that needs to be considered, and making sure that the impact is minimized for the school. The plan has to be, the plan needs to be approved by the principal and also shared with the principal supervisor. This was put in place because I felt the principal was kind of the most direct in the ground, the person who would know most if whether these activities were impacting the school or not, or minimally. And then lastly, if these conditions are met, and this is the part that I have some questions about as well. We kind of just, I was brainstorming with Director Brim Edwards, and we just kind of settle on this for now. We wrote, if these conditions are met, the standard allowable travel time shall be a maximum of 15 school days, with additional flexibility as approved by the district. So, yeah, there we are.
So, Liz, did you have, or I don't know if this, Mary, if this is you, did staff have any reaction to?
Margaret did not have an opportunity to look at it when it came in late last week, so that will still happen, I believe. Oh, I don't have the latest information.
Sorry, Kristen is here to speak on behalf of Margaret. I think one of the things that I know Margaret has talked about is, one of the things in the many discussions for why it was difficult to take the trips last year is looking at the timing of things. So looking at dates, for example, spring break or winter break, or actually summer, for which there is school in some of the programs. For Japanese program goes through the summer. And so I think that consideration, I know, was difficult for the groups to want to embrace for a variety of reasons. One of them you mentioned was that the teachers didn't want to work during their spring break. But looking at the balance of who's impacted, for the students versus we can get another teacher who doesn't want to give up their spring break to perhaps, or another administrator to perhaps take on the chaperoning position.
Yeah, yeah, well, go ahead. Oh, yeah, please.
Hi, good evening. Kristen McCloskey. I'm a Senior Director of Schools. I work directly with Mount Tabor Middle School in the Japanese DLI program there. So this, full transparency, I got this today. So after looking over and just some of the things that have come up, just in planning with the team, the 15 school days feels like a lot. I understand it says a maximum, and it's 3 full calendar weeks being out of school. And even looking just at the typical number of days that are requested, I've been working with them for the past 2 years, and typically the number of days that they request to be out of the country and to be on this trip is 10 days, 12 days, something along those lines. And if we do look at different opportunities to combine, fall break, for example, the first 2 days of fall break, those are conference days, for example, right? And so they'd actually only be working outside of their contracted days for 1 day, for example, right? So if combining with different breaks is unsustainable, there are other opportunities, and I think that's where we've been trying to get with the teams, right? And I don't work with all of the teams, I work with one in particular, but there are other opportunities, and in the 15 days just makes me a little bit nervous of we don't want students to be out of the building and disrupted for that long, because it does have a significant impact on the rest of the school community as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with that strongly. The original one I wrote, and this is why I mentioned that this is up for debate, was actually, I think I wrote something like the travel time should be the standard allowable travel. And I purposely put standard because that allows some flexibility. The standard allowable travel time should be a minimum of 10 days is actually what I originally wrote. Because one of the issues I had was that if we wrote a maximum, then there's nothing to stop, because the current AD says that 5 travel days is the acceptable amount, right? And that if we put a maximum language, even with this, maximum of 15 school days, I think maybe the fact that standard isn't there may allow some leeway in this, but there's still nothing to stop it from being 50. So I feel like, and I think I understand the concern. I think so my question would be, if we're trying to push I think this year has been creativity in terms of using other school days. However, when that can't happen, like for example, like in Japan is not in school during our spring break. And part of the thing is that they're also trying to be attending school in these foreign countries. And so Taiwan was not in school during our summer break. And so how do we put into a policy where we can, you know, like you said, the standard or the typical was 10 to 12 days, right? We can allow that, but also encourage creativity in using the calendar to minimize the number of days that they're gone. If that makes sense, right?
And maybe just to add, the reason why I changed it from minimum to maximum is this policy is for all travel and field trips, and most field trips are maybe 1 day or to 5, but so there's very few that would go to even 10 days, so that's why I changed to maximum. I do think we have addressed, though, the issue of the AD would need to be changed because 5 days, I think it said 5 days except for it's exceptional, and we've changed the language that it's no longer that you'd be exceptional, but try to define what exceptional is, because exceptional could mean a lot of different things. And I think two of the things from my perspective, since this has been an ongoing issue for the last 10 years, and one that I was involved in last draft, is that there have been a lot of changes at the host school to make it less impactful, but I think the 5 days is just having, as somebody has traveled to Asia, you can't get to Asia and function. In a very short amount of time is different than going, say, if you're going to Mexico and you're maybe 1 or 2 time zones different versus 14,
Right.
and then just the travel amount of time, which is we've added the word extended. We got rid of the word exceptional and made extended overseas travel, which is different from, say, a shorter trip. Just acknowledging that might take some extra time. I'm curious, is there something between 5 and 15 that 10? So, okay, so here's, and we went back and forth, but if you had, for example, 10 with the flexibility, it's not just 10 and that's the hard, there is, with additional flexibility as approved by the district. That gives you some outlier days.
So I guess
12?
Outlier, yeah, 12, yeah, 12 and a half.
And when I referenced 12, it was specific to this one school that I support that does this, and it was total days, not school days. Yeah. And then
So, I'm sorry,
get-
you're saying that Mount Tabor only takes 12 days? I thought their trip was 17 days.
this is only my second year in PPS, and so this past year, of course, it was less than, or this, a month ago, a few weeks ago when they went, it was less than that, and then last year I want to say it was 12 days, but I could be incorrect, but it definitely was not 17.
12 school days?
No,
Calendar.
calendar days. Yes.
Yeah, so I guess what we're identifying here is actual school days, which I think is useful because then that would encourage the use of more creative calendar things, like, for example, doing it over conferences or doing it over, I think they went over Memorial Day weekend, right, and things like that. Or there was
This year,
some
yeah.
planning days that they went over as well.
And
for
next
this
year, our planning days are consecutive,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, really?
Mhm.
So you could, if you had 10 school days, you, in theory, using 2 weekends, that gets you to 14. 2 planning days, gets you to 16. But it'd
You're
have
talking
to,
about calendar days or school?
well, now I'm on that's
Calendar
16 calendar days.
So at the end of a quarter, right? So there's a planning day and a grading day that are back to back at the end of a quarter. But if they're only missing 5 school days, then that would still, thinking about the current policy that's in place, that would, I don't know, I don't have a calendar with me, but if they left Saturday before, Saturday, Sunday, that's 2 plus 5.
You'd have 10
school days at
calendar days,
7,
no.
plus 2 more planning days. I mean, that's 9 days total for a trip, which isn't outrageous. And also, in working with Margaret, it really, that school, this isn't a widespread district issue, right? It's pretty localized to this specific trip.
Well, you're gonna
Well,
have
3 trips.
you're gonna have
The
Ma-
Vietnamese and then.
Mandarin,
Chinese.
Vietnamese, which will be new, and then Japanese.
Right. The Vietnamese trip, I don't think has happened yet. I don't know that
They
they've
went on one,
requested
but
a
it was
trip.
like, it was unbelievably short this
Okay.
year. We approved one.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and it's really not fair to be short when you're going that far and spending that much money. And it seems to me, 10 if you're counting on planning days, first of all, you're stuck at that particular calendar time.
Mhm.
And often that's not when programs are available in the country. I mean, maybe school's not going on then, and they want school business. So it seems to me a maximum of 10 makes sense, because if you do 2 weeks and weekends, that's 14 days. Nobody went over those, did they? Or even wanted to go over those. I think most of those groups would be comfortable with 14 days, and that gives you some flexibility. And if you could do it on other planning days, great, but I don't think we can count on that. They really struggled to find times on our last policy. And it really didn't seem fair with the depth of the program that they have, that they had to struggle that much.
I also want to just kind of make sure that we always step back and have a little perspective, because I think one of the things that we're trying to govern, but at the same time there's the reality on the ground, right? And I spent a little bit of time in Mount Tabor and Harrison Park, and I've talked to the admin and the teachers, not every teacher, but some of the teachers, and there was overwhelming support for these, and I think one of the things that we lose perspective on is that how do we see like the classroom working, right? Is it there's this old idea that things work in the classroom linearly, like you teach A and then you teach B, and yeah, if that were the case, then yeah, having students missing, like a third of my class missing, it would be very impactful. But what I've heard from the ground is not that. I think what I've been hearing is that the teachers, and I can envision this for myself, because best practice these days is like project-based learning, inquiry-based, right? And so when you have a third of your kids gone, and that's going to happen, it's not a surprise. You can plan for that, and that allows a little bit more, what I've been hearing, and it makes sense to me, having from my educational background, the teachers have more one-on-one time with their students, they're doing more projects, right? It's not a linear, education is not linear, right? It's messy, it's all over the place. And so with these, there's actually been a lot of positive talk about having these trips, even if it took this long. So and I'm not saying that we should be like, oh yeah, give them all the time in the world. I think we should be trying to minimize the days, but we also have to, I think, keep perspective about like, is it really as impactful? I mean, as long as in the policy there is strong wording, I think, about trying to minimize the impact for the students that are not going, and from what I've seen, there have been real efforts by everybody to try to minimize that, and I think that was the good thing about the original. The change in the policy and trying to attack that. But now that's in place, it's still not perfect. And so I think this is where we're trying to tackle this and try to bring a little bit more, kind of meet the needs of today, right? And so, one of the issues, like, yeah, they could go over spring break, but then at the same time, it's like, how fair is that? I mean, it's not just the teacher that says, this is unsustainable to give up my spring break every year. Because I don't have any support in this, but actually a lot of students have said the exact same things, and the families as well. One of the things I know very well after 20 years of doing this is like spring break is it's probably the most needed vacation, because by then everyone's burnt out. All the students are burnt out, all the teachers are burnt out, everyone needs a break. And requiring them to go over spring break, and this is, I was just talking to some admin that went on this trip. They said that this was a lot. I mean, this is a ton of work. And so going over there and having them sacrifice their spring break is kind of like, it just couldn't come at a worse time. And so I think, and like you said, every year could be different. So like, how do we write a policy that could push to maximize the days by minimize the number of days, school days missed, but not be so rigid that if things change, they can't, it kills the program, right? And so maximum or minimum, it seems like we are sort of landing on 10-ish, 10.5-ish days.
So let's go with that for a moment. And maybe, and I don't know who to ask this question to, but it'd be good to have across the program. So we have 2 Mandarin, but they're all gonna be landing at Harrison Park.
Except for the Tubman.
Where do, okay, so we've got 2 schools, because, so for example, if a Tubman staff needs to go, there's like an additional school. So Tubman, Harrison Park, Mount Tabor, and Roseway Heights. So to understand, if we had 10 school days with quote, the additional flexibility is approved by the district. So say, for example, we had a year in which the grading and the planning weren't at the same time. I don't know. Let's see if that works. And then my next question is going to be, for those programs also, what is their staffing model? I think for all of them, the district requires an administrator go.
Yes.
And then what other staff go? Because one of the reasons why the complaint happened and there was the change in the policy was that you had non-programmatic staff going on the trip, and it meant like there was substitutes for non-language classes that essentially you were having other kids having subs for a significant period of time, and also having the administrator out. So it would be good to know what their current models are to reduce that. We've added in a C, which is, in the B, about if it's a reoccurring or an annual trip, that the non-programmatic staff to take into consideration the needs of the students who remained at the school.
I just want to ask a clarifying question as we're gathering this information. So the focus is on the trips to Asia that currently happen during the school year. As drafted, there's nothing that would stop in this policy language that would prevent the West Sylvan trip that currently goes after school from moving into the school year. Is that the intent? The discussion is just about these programs to Asia. I want to make sure the intent of the
Yeah,
board and what it's.
that I've heard that there hasn't been an intent to move that trip to this.
I'm just talking about the policy language. Is it?
Would it allow it?
Yes.
I suppose so. It's having been a chaperone on that. First of all, it's not a vacation. Let's just be clear
It's not.
with 38th graders, it's not a vacation. They don't attend school. I mean, they attend like an institute, like a language institute, but it's not a.
And my point was just as an example, is there anything because the focus is on these specific trips to Asia, is there anything that the policy is intending to limit to that? Or it's a statement that would apply to any trips regardless, if they otherwise met the criteria?
Well, I think like this is why on version A, additional flexibility and requirements and extended time may be granted when distance travel requires additional time, such as extended overseas travel. And we tried to add these qualifiers, extended versus, I mean, that's qualitative. I mean, we were thinking the difference between 14 time zones and 3 is a lot different. I mean, you lose like a day and a half. So do you want to, we could be more specific about the time, but I don't see.
I'm looking for the intent, and then we can come back with language to
Okay.
document that.
So that's what we were trying to get after, the extended overseas travel, which is like you basically lose almost 2 days just getting there and getting back and recovering.
Gain the 2 days coming back.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like that, believe me.
Yeah, and then a week of jet lag.
So that's what we were trying to focus on. And then also, again, getting rid of the word exceptional, because people are like, hey, going to Europe for, 2 weeks would be exceptional, like, which that's why we changed it to rigorous academic experience, such as attending school.
So should we put that the criteria that you have to be in a school, otherwise it's more like a vacation if you're not in it? I mean, the requirement for it to be extended.
Well, that, I think
You know what
that,
I mean?
hopefully that's what 0, which it should be.
I'm just trying to get clarifying, because there will be questions
Yeah,
about
version,
that.
like the very first one is,
Is it- Yeah, it just it reset the bullet points, yeah.
yeah.
Version
See,
A.
the very first framing paragraph, that's what we were trying to get at, so that's what the intent is, so if you want to add more to it.
Yeah, because it says, that's why we added, or I added, I don't remember anymore, such as attending school in a foreign country, so we added example. I don't know if that's
great.
best
No, I think
practices
that-
or.
Yeah, the Costa Rica trip in recent years has had school time. And I'm using that only as an example, not because I just want to make sure what's in and what's out is clear.
Yeah, would it have to be attending school though? I mean, there could be a lot of rigorous stuff going on that wasn't attending school.
Well-
Yeah.
what is it that you're thinking?
Right.
Well, here's an example, I'll just use, so for 4 years, my for spring break went to Arizona with the baseball team. It was not a rigorous academic experience, like you just look at the schedule. But it was spring break and they didn't miss any school, so, but you could look at the schedule and tell that it wasn't a rigorous academic experience. I think what we were trying to do is identify when you'd have extenuating circumstances and try and describe it more than, like the word exceptional, I think irritated a lot of people who weren't in the program, because, I mean, there's lots of definitions of exceptional, and so it was sort of like that. You could describe it as exceptional, but a lot of other people would use that. It's a very subjective word versus trying to describe what we're trying to get at. Does that make?
No, I think I understand that part, and we'll come back with a few suggestions to clarify the other.
So the other question that Eddie raised, and since we're in committee, I'm just going to use, it'd be more informal, is whether, like, the district's requirement that it be an administrator, is there, like, could a teacher leader do that? And is there something about the administrative license? Go ahead.
Yeah, so every time they're overseas, something happens that requires additional administrative support. And that can be a student becoming injured, or it can be just problem solving around student discipline issues, or it could be coordinating just a variety of things, right? I know that on various trips, there's been chaperones that have needed some support from an administrator to really support kids. And so that's a big part of the reason, just having access to that background and that experience and being able to support in that way. I know that administrators have requested to not necessarily be in charge of chaperoning a particular group so that they can float in between and respond as needed. And that has been done to various extents, right? Money sometimes limits that. And actually, if we're having another adult on this trip, we really need you to be chaperoning this group, and that's fine. But that's the lens that they bring in, the support that they offer.
Question about that. Is that something that, for example, could we have, so the feedback I got when I talked to some of the administrators was that it was, I asked that question, like, is it important to the administrator? And, I'm not going to tell you their answer, but one of the things that they brought up was that it was important that the person who went on knew the students, right? And so that's why it should be someone from the school, and whether it's administrator or not. So my question is, like, for example, would it be possible to have, say, another teacher to go on that got extra training to do that? Like, is that something that could be trained? Like, in terms of, like, because if you're overseas, right, I mean, there's only so much you can do anyways, right? But, like, how to get the contacts, or do, I guess, is there, for the requirement for an administrator, is this something that we could creatively problem solve around? Or is there some legal issue?
As far as the legal issue, I'm not sure.
So let's, how about if we do this? I just want to be mindful of the time. That's a question.
Yeah.
Um,
Answer it whenever. Later. Later is good.
Yeah. I have an additional question, which is the model of each of those, whether it's only program teachers who go or non-program teachers, because I think that also is a big differentiator. And you don't necessarily, if you don't know them all, let's get them all. And so that when we can look at sort of the totality, because we may need to do some norming,
Okay.
if they're all different.
Okay.
Is that
I
all
have
right?
the question written down for you.
Great.
Um,
And, you know, just also like keep them, you know, like, for example, what if there's some exceptional cases? Like, for example, like if a school had a long-term sub that knew all the students already and would have been perfect candidate, right? Like, in that scenario, we're looking, anyways, it's just something to consider. Yeah.
So that's like a variation of the question, which is it just programmatic staff? And then could it be other staff who, whether it's a long-term sub, who aren't actually school staff, who have other responsibilities to the rest of to the school? And then the third question would be, do staff who have responsibilities to other students at the school, do they go? And if we get that across the programs, I think it'll start giving us a sense of like, how much flexibility or not it should have. Does that work?
Yeah, I like that.
Any other questions about the language? Patty, do you have any?
No.
Okay. So next meeting, if we could have maybe the answers maybe in advance, or at least the range of answers, and then ideally, if we're close to kicking something out next meeting, it would be great to send something out if we have all the information we need and it's like there's alignment. Does that work?
Yeah. I like that.
Liz, did you have a question?
Oh, I was just looking for when the next meeting is. How?
It's in like a couple weeks. I think it's the end of, in 2 weeks, right? So, like a week and a half, or 2 weeks and a half.
The next meeting scheduled for June 27th.
Okay. All right. I'm going to really quickly move through the next. I'm just going to have the topic introduced because this one, thank you very much. Appreciate it. The next topic is a policy that staff wants us to make a slight revision to, and I'm going to ask to have it introduced, and then I'm going to request that if board members have questions, that they send them to, is this a Mary or a Liz policy?
Is this Emily Glasgow?
This is the acceleration and retention of students.
All right. Hello, I'm Derek Johnson, one of the senior directors here for PPS, and Dr. Glasgow couldn't be here, so I wanted to introduce the policy and the purpose behind it. Right now, we're really cleaning up this policy so that we can have more systematic decisions and better language around how we accelerate and retain students. Specifically, in the current policy, parents make recommendations for retention. For example, the principal meets with parents and goes through a process to make a determination, and then it has to be approved by the senior directors of schools. With the new revision, there's a deadline. This conversation needs to happen with the parents prior to the end of the second semester, just so that we're having good communication and we're using data to drive our decision making. And when it comes to acceleration, one of the big changes is we need to make sure that system-wide we're using data to make sure that students, that we are recommending the right students who are exceptional according to the data for acceleration. Currently, we don't have a process where the district office and the experts and instruction of the district office are looking at all the processes. It just gives people in the OTL department an ability to look at the student, how they're performing compared to their grade level peers, and they're going to bring that information to help support the principal when they make that final decision. Also, there's a lot of wording in the policy that are things that we should be doing for all kids anyways. We should be looking at standardized testing results. Interventions should be being given in core, and we should have our instructional coaches and their teams and the instructional leadership teams really working at the school level, bi-weekly or weekly, looking at students, and they should be the ones who are saying, hey, this kid really is gifted and they might need to accelerate, and also find students who aren't being successful and having these conversations as a school of how they're going to make sure no students fall through the cracks.
Great. And it's my understanding this policy, we're getting revisions because we either rescinded or changed a previous policy?
Correct. We made a change about the early entrance. There had been a language that, in another policy, that allowed families to get kind of private evaluations for an early access.
And we limited that.
We removed that language.
Okay, so this is really aligning with some other changes we made. And thank you very much for the presentation and being here on Emily's behalf and the team's behalf. So since two of you might have a point of view or some questions, I'm going to, Patty and Eddie, ask you to send them to staff and copy me. So ideally, this would be, or I would think this should be relatively routine to move this out of committee since it's making conforming changes. But of course, if you have questions or perspective, but not now, we will take them into consideration. And we'll either, if there aren't any questions or significant concerns, I probably will move this out of committee next time. If there are concerns or things we want to discuss, we'll maybe hold it for another week.
We just had one question. You said for retention, you needed to start talking at the end of the second quarter, sounds like. Would that be the same for acceleration, to start the discussion early?
Yeah, I'm not the expert of the policy, Dr. Glasgow is, but really, our hopes is that we're having that conversation with data early on, and the school's responsibility is to make sure that we're talking to parents, like by that first report card, about how their students are performing nationwide, so that we can start those conversations if necessary.
Right. Again, if you have questions, send them in advance and we'll try and get them connected. Thank you. I know next on the agenda had cell phone policy, but I am going to move to the AI policy so that, because I really apologize, the last meeting we didn't get to that. So I want to go ahead. This is a very preliminary start to potentially a larger conversation. So this is just to give the committee a sort of preview of the issues and sort of start this will obviously be continued into next year. And the initial conversations that Liz and I had was that if there's a policy, we have policies that touch on AI or the use of AI in a whole host of other policies. So it's not this is a brand new topic, but it's not all in one place. And there's also just new issues that come about because of AI. But because of things are so rapidly changing, the policy probably should be fairly high level so that we're not changing it all the time, and have the AD be more the thing that's evolving rapidly with technology. Is that?
That's correct. And I think that's probably true across a multiple suite of policies, whatever the new high-level AI policy is, but also the ones responsible technology use, potentially student conduct and discipline, anti-harassment, all these places. So we will, I think the work of staff as we continue this conversation is to bring that high-level draft and the other places where there may need to be tweaks or amendments.
Perfect. So this is just the very first preliminary conversation. Liz, do you want to introduce the topic and who you're going to have present here?
Well, I work for them also. So I think PPS, like many districts is trying to figure out how to provide meaningful guidance that allows for all of the educational and pedagogical opportunities of AI, because it creates some really incredible tools that can be very generative for work in the classroom and work with students. But it also, how do we provide guidance to protect the uses of AI to appropriate uses, thinking about FERPA, confidential student information, and whether that's put into what I think I said in the last meeting, the AI ocean instead of the PPS pond, right? And also harassing, and I think people have seen many instances in the newspapers online. I'm so old. God, I'm old. Of the misuse of AI to create false images and narratives and statements. So we think about all of those things, and there are week-long seminars on this. But we're trying to focus on what is the meaningful, workable guidance that we can provide in our schools that, as Julia said, is flexible as the technology changes and the issues emerge and evolve. So I'll let these fine gentlemen from IT introduce themselves, and they are really the subject matter experts on so much of this.
Good evening. Don Wolf, I'm the Chief Technology Officer.
Derek Brown, Senior Director of Technology Operations.
So, and as we've touched on, I deeply appreciate the wanting to enter into this topic at a very high level. We've seen the impact that the internet has had on our society since the mid to late 90s. That's going to seem kind of pale in comparison to what AI is going to introduce into our societies. And we're at the very beginning of it. So if you think about it right now, the technology you're using, the AI engines you're using right now, are the worst you're ever going to see. And they're doing some pretty incredible and amazing things so that we can't even get our heads around. But how do we do that responsibly? And how do we ensure that we're using it in a positive manner with our students, for our students, to extend our students, and making sure we're not excluding any segments of our populations that we're trying to teach. So there's a lot to weigh in on what we're doing around this particular topic. And we're at the very beginning, so there's a lot we don't know. So trying to draft that and look at some of the examples that have been put out there, even though they're burgeoning, to leave us in a place where we can respond without having to change a policy, but direct that towards an AD is, I appreciate the wisdom behind that ask from this policy committee.
I'm sorry, do you envision there'd be a policy for sort of staff and general use, and then a whole other sort of policy draft for like student use?
Envision more guidance first and awareness, talk about what it is, what it isn't, what we want it to be, and have conversations with Office of Teaching and Learning as well. So it's a collaborative effort, and there'll be a committee formed as well. We want to do all of that first before putting something together. It'll be at the same time in parallel.
But I also think when you talk about citizenship, whether you call it digital citizenship or not, I refer to it as citizenship because the world our students are entering into when they leave our buildings is a digital first world, and it becomes just part of their natural environment. So not necessarily needing to focus on a student version of what this looks like, but a responsible use policy. A citizenship, we already have that. This falls under the guidance of that, and there's very direct correlations. So there may be some other policies that we have in place that need some tweaking, that need some refreshing, but not wholesale upscaling that would address that issue when we talk about how we operationalize it versus how we monitor the use and the extension of that in our learning environments.
So you're saying you don't think there would be a difference between the student policies for students and policies for, because, okay, just for example, I could see it's like using AI to like draft me my report on X topic, like a student saying that, and then versus a teacher like create a 5th grade curriculum on or let's set a lesson plans on this topic. The first seems like not what we'd want, but the second would be like potentially an acceptable use.
Correct, and I would go back to that student use or potential misuse, because I think if there is an avenue for students to be doing exactly that, if it's an iterative approach, and how do I approach writing and those types of things, but it's the intent of the lesson that was delivered to them. So, and again, our responsible use policy goes back to not cheating, not plagiarizing, not presenting work that is not your own, which AI would be considered not your own work. But there is a world where that would be presented in an approach to learning how to write better or how to present something. So again, it goes back to how are we helping build up the skills of our instructors to utilize this tool into the deepest benefit of our students' education. So that's where I would differ, that there needs to be a specific policy that governs AI and student behavior.
A framework was put out last week by Los Angeles Unified School District, and it breaks it into frameworks for classroom resources, family resources, educational resources, and just computer science. And it references how it can be used in the classroom, can be used by teachers, Canva, Google. This is much like the internet when it was introduced to us. And now it's not much to do about anything because we all do it, we all know how to use it. So that's where we are at the beginning of all this. We have to set the stage of what it is, what it isn't, and that responsible use, and those are the frameworks we'll be starting from. We won't be creating this. In a sense, it's already been created by other school districts, and what we would like to do is bring those resources to you, and then from that, draft it and make it our own.
I think one of the other domains we want to think about is for the district, but outside of classroom use. So you think about what are requirements for vendors with whom we do business? And do they use our data are they using AI tools that might send our data outside, right? So we want to also think about data protection in a contracting research sense.
There's a huge domain on the readiness checklist that schools should be paying attention to on what you should focus in, and risk and purchasing is one of those elements. We don't want our private information that is used to be training these models, is exactly, I think, the model that Liz is talking about.
And our purchasing and contracting guru, Emily Courtenage, is already thinking about that and working on our forms. But I think it's an important policy piece as well, because that policy will help educate people to think about how the data that we may be sharing with and it could be big data, it could be little data with a vendor, may get put out into an AI tool and then is no longer within our control.
Right.
Well, the good news is we're not starting from scratch. I mean, there's information out here from ISTE, International Society for Technology and Education. There's lots of practical frameworks that are already available. So we're not starting from scratch.
So I'm curious, the LA one, is that a policy or something else?
This just came out last week. They're right now calling it an instructional technology initiative, and it's just rich, full of resources based on AI. It's all about AI.
So it's more like district information versus
guidelines on how to approach the use of it. And they've updated their particular AI policy, but I have not gotten my hands on a copy of that yet, which will be one that we'll be looking at to potentially reference as well. They're way out in front in their delivery of AI in their community, as many of you are very familiar with their AI Ed project, which is focused on students and families.
Liz, how do you want to approach the development? So it seems like we could get a couple models that are general and then look at also the policies we already have. Although, for example, things like the acceptable use of technology, it seems like that would be a section of a larger policy versus that if you're looking for acceptable uses of technology, you could find something about AI, but that seems like there should be a base policy that then reference some of the other ones versus just like distributed out
Yeah, I think there probably is a standalone AI policy, but it won't be the only policy work. What I would offer the committee is to send us out to come back with a draft and give you the context for why we have pieces in and out. We can share context from other places. I don't know that we can do that by the next meeting, but perhaps the meeting after that, if that, yeah.
Eddie and Patty, what would you want to know? I think to me, that's a good approach, like start with the straw man.
Yeah, I mean, I figured this is almost as difficult as like making a policy for automobiles in the 1910s, right? I mean, like, it's a great tool to change society, but dangerous if you use it wrong. And how automobiles have changed society. So I feel like you said, we're at the beginning of it. We don't know what's coming up. And we know there's a lot of laws around automobiles, so.
Yeah, I think we'll certainly miss something, or something will be developed later, but we can, Don won't miss anything, sorry. But we can, I think, starting to have the conversation and educate our students and families and team members to think through the implications of where they send data and how these tools work, and for all of us to get smarter. The generation of this policy and the discussion that it will require will add value as we work towards a policy that will be the first start and undoubtedly will evolve over time.
Yeah, I guess when you mention responsible use, we're going to cell phones next. About we're not even doing that right. So it's going to be hard, and I just have to throw it to you.
And we have a wonderful opportunity to learn from what social media has created and those devices being so readily available without any guidelines, without any real focus on how we've approached that. We get to rectify some past mistakes.
Maybe we'll do better.
I hope so. That's our job. Iterative learning.
Do we get very many questions from staff or teachers about, is this okay to do something using AI, or do people just do their thing?
We have folks that are curious, that are reaching out saying, what can I do? How can I do this? We have a very knowledgeable staff that understands PII in large degrees, that understand people that I have conversations with, that they shouldn't be putting that there publicly, or that personally identifiable information. And we have folks that kind of run on their own. So we're watching the use of AI tools. We've got a pretty good idea of what's happening on our network creep up. But the larger use is being used by our students. There's more significant use and we have a lot more students in our buildings than we do teachers and staff. So
that would be my other question is, I'm wondering whether the high schools have, that'd be the primary area, whether the high schools have just sort of iterated some policy, small p, on their own because of things that they have seen. When I was walking in with Dr. Armstrong, I was telling about my son who teaches at a university. He's a graduate TA, and he has really clear policies that he's devised for his students not to use, in terms of what is acceptable for them to use in terms of like writing their papers and providing data. So I'm wondering if the high schools have developed something just on their own, or whether it's just very ad hoc. To my awareness, it's if there are policies, I am not aware of their existence or how they're handling that in their individual buildings at this time. It is conversations we need to be having.
And again, I think we're going to keep coming back to, I'm looking at the Ida B. Wells academic integrity statement in their student handbook, right? All of those principles about having your work be your own, not putting out anyone else's work and representing it to be otherwise, fabrication, all the pieces. Those would apply to AI, but whether people are connecting those dots or not, I don't know. So I think there's probably a constellation of things that exist that apply and people are applying them, or there are boundaries that exist that people aren't connecting to AI, and then there's the new frontier AI. We probably see all of those things.
Yeah, like if you have AI, like edit your paper, is that okay? And do you have to disclose that versus them writing your paper?
And we're approaching this as if AI is a new thing. AI is multiple decades old. So your spell checker, that red squiggly line on your Word document or on your Google Doc, is a version of artificial intelligence. So if we're allowing our students to use that, is there any, so that Grammarly or some other tools, is that really, it's a fascinating conversation that we need to be having, because it enables a whole bunch of opportunities for some students to exceed and extend, and others to get it right for the very first time. That is, Eddie, you've been in the classroom, is an amazing thing to experience with a student. So it's how we choose as the professionals in our classrooms to use and deploy and work with our students in how that is moving forward.
So next steps,
Staff will come back with a draft and context for that draft policy, as well as expected changes to related policies. I think is our takeaway.
and do you think you'd also come back with changes to the other policies that?
Sorry, that's what I tried to just say. Yes, so yes, to the other policies.
There'd
as
be
well.
like a model policy.
Yeah, and then the companion
Connected to it.
changes needed to other existing policies. So they're done together. We're thinking about them as a whole. Not next time, not May 27th.
No, that's-
Or June 27th.
June 27th, no.
No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that seems like that works. This seems to be a policy that we would probably want fairly deep engagement with both school staff and district staff. Because I think there's a whole other very acceptable use at the district level with, that would be very different from school use.
Are you referencing to an operational?
Right, I mean, just the things that are happening in the business world and
Mhm.
the professional world, that it's totally acceptable because you're not actually learning or passing something off as your own learning product. Go ahead.
Yes, but it's also the release of that data into those programs.
Yes.
And so that's the companion piece we think about at the district level.
Okay, I'm sure that you'll have something in there that takes care of that. Patty, do you have, or Eddie, anything that?
I'm just glad someone else is working on this.
Oh, no, you can't escape now that you were here for the initial conversation. Eddie?
I will keep listening.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there was a great article a year ago, I think, that was in the Washington Post. Everyone's using AI, you don't even realize it, right? Like your Spotify playlist,
That's right.
right? So like,
Siri.
how do these things trying to get you addicted to their offerings? But anyways, yeah, so I think it's going to be an interesting line. I think it would be very helpful to have, when we have these policies, a specific example of what problem it's trying to solve, right? I think that would be very useful to have, because I think that's the kind of thing that if we're bringing it out to the community, to our staff and teachers, to have a discussion with them, that it would help them to see like, oh yeah, this is the problem we're trying to solve. And that would start conversation. You know, I think that would be necessary to start a robust conversation.
I think it would be great also, in addition to student rep, we're going to lose some of our students over the summer, just in terms of engagement, but I don't anticipate this moving anytime soon in the summer, but like next fall, having students like pressure tested or what questions they have or things, the ways that they're using it that we probably haven't thought about.
Well, I know that the education magazines have a lot of information about how you can use it and how teachers are using it in the classroom and how they use it for their own planning. So it's definitely out there in education.
Okay, we have a plan ahead. Thank you so much, and again, apologies the last time we didn't get to this.
No worries. We're here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So the last topic on today's agenda is cell phones in schools, and that we've had this on a couple weeks along with a lot of different materials. And this is going to be similar to the AI discussion, and that I don't anticipate anything moving quickly. Since this has been out there for a long time, it's not like we're trying to get ahead of anything. That it's also something that I think a lot of people will have perspectives on and opinions and want to weigh in on. This week, we had some additional sort of data points brought in, and thanks to Eddie, do you want to share what you asked to have included in the discussion?
Yeah. So one thing that, thankfully, I'm still connected with a lot of the current employees at Benson and other schools. But yeah, they share with me the survey that they, for teachers, or their staff survey. And it was a Google Forms. So and what's uploaded in Board Books is kind of the result. It shows you the Google the form survey. There are 43 responses. Pretty overwhelmingly want something to be done about cell phones. Is the takeaway.
So this is teachers.
Yeah, these are all teachers, right? It is something that, also very personal to me, because I know I was lucky, I don't know, lucky is a strong word, to teach during the period where half my teaching career was before smartphones and the second half was after smartphones. And there was a very stark difference in the environment and teaching and the problems. One of the things that, this is something that I think I very strongly urge us to tackle, because it's something that a lot of teachers in many schools have been asking for support and help. And this is our way to respond to that and to offer support. It is the current system that a lot of schools have, is not very sustainable or practical. Like, for example, the one that for the majority of my smartphone career was, 1, 2, 3 strikes, type of system. The problem with that is, if I have 180 students to keep track of, they not only having a hard time who is on their second strike or third strike and what to do with that, it also brings the liability issue, right? So if I confiscate their phone and it gets stolen or lost, I am now responsible. And that's not something that a teacher should ever be placed in a situation of. And the other thing is also students get very smart about how to get out of their second or third strike. And it's like, no, I'm on my first strike. They know how to do the puppy eyes and
You fall for the puppy
I am
eyes?
a sucker for puppy eyes. But anyways, and then there's the equity issue, right? Where you have kids that you don't want to be picking on more, and sometimes it happens that way. And so I think the current system we have is very complicated and it's very unsustainable. And I think what this is showing is that I think we need to do something on the district side of things, in some form of support. Something, whether it be a standardized policy, but I think the big ask is for something that is doable, right? Not something that puts the burden on the students or the teachers. And anyways, it's all up on Board Books. Everyone can read it on their own. One thing we do notice is that smartphones, because there's a difference. I used to have, I didn't have one of those big bricks, but I was very envious of the people who did. A lot of apps and stuff use the science of addiction to get people, and especially kids, hooked. And there's also been a lot of very strong brain studies about how distractions really affect learning. For example, there's been a study I remember I was not a part of, but I was adjacent to at OHSU when I did an internship there, was that every time someone gets distracted, it takes the brain something like 15 to 20 minutes to get re-engaged, right? So like deep thought, deep work, and all that stuff is really effective. So in a way, when we have cell phones in the classroom and they're constantly ding, ding, and you have to check it because that's addiction science right there, and then they're being distracted, this is taking away from their learning. And I think because of that, it is, I think, something, something that if we're if we're really centering students, we need to really tackle. So, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I was at a town hall meeting at Franklin where they were talking about attendance, and somebody brought up they really wanted to be in classrooms where people were working together, but it's hard when kids are on their cell phone and not paying attention. And somebody said, oh, I think Grant makes you put your cell phones away. Maybe we should try that. So, the kids are talking about it. And I wonder if part of working on this, because I really would like to support the teachers who are supporting the students really is who we're supporting if we get rid of their addiction, or can't get rid of it, but help them with their addiction, is maybe survey the students and survey the parents, and just get a lot of information together so that when we do make a decision, we've got some weight behind what we're doing. I mean, we've got the weight of the medical profession, we've got the weight of the psychologists, we've got the weight of the sociologists, but we need the weight of our students and our parents, I think, too. So I know, like Frankie says, they can get a survey out to kids really quick. The kids are great about sending out surveys. So when we get into it, I think we should really look at making some deep dives into what other people want.
I wonder did you want to say something, Mary?
Oh, I thought you had mentioned that at the last committee meeting, and I was wondering if any of the cell phone policy examples that you saw in the materials were anything you wanted us to sort of turn to and create a kind of you had mentioned at one point like a straw man policy.
So those policies that I came up with were just from maybe 2 hours of research I did just looking for policies as they're newer ones. So I don't have any particular attachment to them or how well they if they've solved the problem or not. There also is, just like here in our school district, there are some school-based policies also in here. So we go in two directions. We could have committee members look at some of these policies. Are there elements of them that you're interested in, or some that you're interested in, some you might want to have us take a deeper dive, or we could have a more methodical survey of policies to look at and consider. I mean, just in terms of timing, whichever route we go, I would say that I would recommend we wait till like October before we take a deeper dive, because I think we're going to get a lot of data back from Grant. I mean, I think it would be great if everybody went to Mount Scott and visited, but it's a pretty small school, and so you can see how it works there, and the students and staff really are very supportive of it. So again, it gives you a sense of how the Yonder pouches work and everything else, which is what Grant's doing. But Grant will just be like a real life, like PPS example with a much larger sample size.
Although you do have a lot of schools who are looking to you for guidance because they'd like answers sooner.
So the one thing is moving ahead before you get data back from Grant, you potentially could sort of land in the wrong place, and then you get data back from Grant, and you've got some learnings that. Do you think all high schools are ready to go now?
I do think that OSP has adopted a framework for assessing whether schools are ready to proceed, and that's the status quo while the policy work and other data are being gathered from those uses. So I know that some schools would like nice, bright, clear rules that are in every circumstance, and I don't think we're there yet, either in this committee in the policy making or in how the framework that OSP is using for assessing school readiness is done. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
What kind of stuff is in the OSP? Was it a survey, recommendation?
I think I think to Julia, your point that there are some pockets of students who have different needs than others, and so looking at how you build a framework that allows for the recognition that not all schools are the same, right? And not all schools serve the same population of students. For example, reconnection services is a kind of a primary one. These are reconnection services, so students who are, the staff there is working very hard to get students back engaged, and perhaps a very prohibitive policy would keep them from re-engaging, which is the primary goal.
What I understand OSP is using is an assessment of whether there is an existing cell phone policy or practice in the school, and what does the data say about its success, and what has the staff, student, and community engagement been about a cell phone program or practice at a particular school, including whether it's Yonder or something else, and engaging in the school community. Once that happens, a principal can request, with approval from the senior director, to implement a program or policy. Again, this came up in the context of a request for Yonder. And then the data collected will be assessed to determine if that's a good fit. So that's, again, it's a rough framework, but that's what is being used now on a school-by-school request, as I understand it.
Okay.
Correct.
So school by school, and they're talking to parents and students and faculty.
Staff, student, and community engagement is a prerequisite to moving forward.
Did you have something else you wanted to add?
No, I'm here just in case I can.
Okay.
I'm needed, yep.
Yeah. So I would hope you may have different solutions, but I think we could still have an overarching policy, because I do like asking individual teachers or individual principals or school staff to all implement something different seems like not a good idea. I know exactly where my kids would go. Lowest common denominator, or they would have when they were teenagers. One of the things I'm curious about is Grant paid for Yonder out of their own, the school budget, or raised funds, and it was $60,000.
And that was with a discount that they received for being an early implementer. So it would have been more. It's very.
Yeah, a question I would have is like, is that a bond? Could like the bond pay for the, I mean, it's like a technology hardware, I don't know.
The question about future bond, the use of bond funds for that going forward would depend on whether those expenses are capable of being capitalized, and I don't know enough about the
Okay, because
equipment that's involved and whether it is a capital expense or an operating expense. We can look into that maybe. I mean, that assumes a particular program at Yonder, right? And there may be other
Yeah.
tools and policy mechanisms that don't
Right.
require that.
I just don't want to just like, hey, it's a free thing. I mean, Grant
It's not
had
a free thing.
Grant had the capability to pay for it, and that's different from, you know, other schools. And frankly, if they're giving Grant an early discount so that to open the door for the rest, and then the rest are more expensive, it would be, maybe, Don, this is in your team's a group of like like Yonder is just the one that they were at Mount Scott, they have now talked to Grant, but they probably aren't the only solution. So are there other solutions that are out there that don't require us to buy a particular brand's solution?
And in some ways, the solution, I'm not sure what is the chicken or the egg here, the solution being defined by the policy parameters, right? So what the policy allows may dictate the consideration set of
Right.
solutions.
I mean, the solution could easily not be a pouch. I mean, it may work great, but other schools may choose different solutions that still meet the policy requirements, that don't cost anything or cost less or are different.
I'm just really glad that the students are being surveyed because, you know, we've been told that students want input and that we don't give them input until we've already made the decision. And then we're happy to take their input.
The good news is we're talking about them at the very beginning.
Yeah. So they will be happy.
And there may be a whole range of opinions, but we'll figure out a way to survey them.
Would it be? Oh,
Go
are you
ahead.
done?
No.
You're not done?
Yep, go ahead.
You're done. Okay. Would it be, because I would like to push this sooner, as soon as we can. I mean, maybe
Not wait for the
October.
grant.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would like to hear about the grant experience as soon as possible, if we can. And what were some of the benefits and drawbacks? One of the things I, also bring, overwhelmingly, what I've heard, I mean, anecdotally, of course, but there's things that, like, data doesn't show, for example, like, overwhelming anecdotally from teachers who are more strict about phones, big observations that when phones are not in the classroom, the students are more happy, they're more engaged, they're actually talking with each other, socializing, actually involved in the work at hand. And so there's that kind of benefit that sometimes I think some of the data doesn't show. I think we really need to get our student voice in this and helping problem solve. But I was also curious, would it be possible to do something like present two options, right? Like a stricter option, maybe a less strict option, and have that be the starting point for debate. Does that kind of make sense? Because I feel like as long as we're talking about this in the abstract, like, should we have a policy or should we not? It's so easy to just kind of go in circles. But if we have something in place, whether that be example from another school district, or whatever, two examples, option A or B, I think that would, I mean, again, this is also a question. I'm not saying this is how we should do it, but when would that be, I would figure that might be helpful in starting this debate, because especially with students, because when the students see, like, hey, here's a potential policy, what are your thoughts on this? I think that's when we're going to get more feedback, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. And so I think the answer is, like, are we going to have a policy? I would say yes. So, and then it's like, what are the topic areas that will be covered? And then within those topic areas, here's the range that you could have. And there'll be things that, like, there'll be universal agreement or near universal agreement. Like, yes, we should do, like, in the range, like, that's what we should do. And others, that's when sort of the board will come in and listen to, like, what are different groups saying along the spectrum.
I like that. So it's kind of like saying, like, oh yeah, these are the things we're agreeing on. How do we make a policy to do that?
It's just like your policy we did at the beginning of the meeting, where A, B, and C are fine, and now when we get to D, maybe it's like, is it 10 or is it 15? But
Right, 12.
that may be it. But I think that's a good approach, but it also, like, you have something to react to. And again, just like the AI, it's like, what are the big categories, and where are the places we could land? You could
Right.
land far over here, like a more permissive and other more strict, and then here's sort of the median, and then also look at what the data shows when, for example, a district has one that's very strict or one that's very permissive.
Mm.
Well, if we
You're
do
gonna
a
get
survey,
the last word, Patty.
Yeah, we just have to be very careful. Setting up a questionnaire would be very important to get it, so we really get good information. And I feel that cell phones are so destructive that having one school have them and one not, and seeing, gosh, who does better and who isn't, is almost criminal. So, you know, it's, that sounds like a bad experiment to me. So I just like to get information and then, well, I don't know. I'll
Go ahead.
say something.
So what I'm hearing is like we should go ahead with looking at some models, and as much we can. I mean, it's very difficult to survey students during the summer. It's just, so we may not have to wait till October, but September.
We got 4 days left.
Well, I think probably Frankie could set one up immediately with her friends.
Yeah, we'll start having some equity issues across schools. There'll be a lot of work that can be done before we even need to have a survey.
And I would love to see the students interact with Dr. Adams' department and how to develop the survey methodology, so we get.
Yeah, what was that he did earlier? It was great. It was the Jefferson student who was the student rep
Oh,
with longer hair.
yeah, Nathaniel.
Nathaniel, yes.
Yeah, I think, but it's how you craft a survey and how you get data, you can sort what you're looking for, how you want to distinguish. I think that would help not only the results, but also help just the learning of how to craft a research-based survey.
Yeah, so for what it's worth, I can't remember what the topic was, but Renard's team and research evaluation helped students create a, I think, somewhat scientifically valid, as much as it could be, survey instrument, and then they surveyed students versus one that was more informal or maybe had some biases in it. So we definitely can do that. Okay, I think we have a plan ahead. Anything else, Mary or Liz, for the next session?
6 o'clock.
I've been watching this. So we're going to adjourn, and we've got some topics for next week. And I'll make sure and send Michelle the assignments, but I really do want to move out the retention one if nobody has any issues. And I would love to be able to move yours if we're able to reach if we have the information we requested and we're able to reach a consensus, if that's.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay. We're adjourned.
Thank you.